My dearest listeners, thank you so much for the support you've shown me so far by liking and commenting on my stories, and most especially subscribing. You all have my whole heart, and your support means so much to me. If this is your first time listening to any of my stories, I'm so happy to have you here, and I promise you, it'd be worth it. Now, let me brief you on today's story. Imagine spending years locked away by your cruel uncle, hidden in a basement, beaten, neglected, and treated as if you were nothing. Then, one fateful moment, you find a chance to escape. You run, desperate and afraid, only to stumble straight into the arms of the powerful alpha of the North Pack. But just as you're beginning to grasp your new reality, the truth shatters everything you thought you knew. Shifters exist, and this alpha isn't the only one who claims you as his mate. Soon, the alphas of the East and West Packs step forward, drawn to you by an unbreakable bond. Now, you're caught between three dominant, enigmatic alphas. They swear to protect you, to stand by your side, but danger lurks in the shadows. Witches creep closer to shifter lands, rebellion brews within the packs, and an even greater darkness stays deep inside you. As your past collides with your future, you're left with a terrifying question. Now that your mates know the truth, will they still protect you as promised? Besties, listen to the story of Astrid.
Astrid POV. Astrid. Astrid. I could hear his shrill voice calling after me as I ran through the forest. I had to escape the man who had kept me locked in the darkness for years. The smell of clean, fresh air was like a relief, but it would only last as long as I could run away. Ah! A scream escaped my throat as something snapped up against my leg, whipping me into the air with my head dangling underneath me. No! I muttered with my heart racing as a man appeared panting in front of me. His grey hair and dirty face stuck out in the early hours of the morning. I couldn't tell anymore after spending most of my days in the darkness of his basement. Why do you keep trying to escape from me, Astrid? He asked as he walked up to me, wringing his nose. His hand swung across, stinging my face with a slap. I could feel blood rushing to my brain even faster than I was hanging upside down. My view turned hazy as I swung around, still trapped by the rope holding my leg. I was never escaping this life, was I? My thoughts spun with my body weight. My life had been a mess, ever since my uncle took me in. Why? I asked, still spinning around in the trap. Why are you doing this to me, uncle? He spat on the floor, slipping out a knife from his waist. Why am I doing this to you? Because your mother said so. I blinked my eyes to clear the fog from them. There was no way my mother would ask for such a thing to happen to her daughter. He walked towards the hidden rope. I dropped to the ground like a bag of potatoes, scrambling to get to my feet, but he was over me, placing a well-timed kick to my stomach. Where do you think you are going, girl? I gagged, drooling with pain, shouting from the spot he had kicked. There was no air in my mouth to answer his question as he placed the cold steel on my neck. I have no qualms about killing you, but it seems you have taken the little liberty I had granted you for a means to escape. A few nights in the basement should keep you in check, he said as I nudged me to my feet, pushing me onto the path. I prayed in my heart as I staggered forward. There was no strength left to cry or run as my legs wobbled under my weight and the watchful eyes of my uncle. We walked on until I could see the log cabin he had forced me to stay in. The yellow lights from the candles ignited a fear in me, but I had to obey. He had threatened me with my life, and I knew living to another day was a better way of surviving. He pushed me into the basement, walking inside me with the knife pointed at my back. Maybe this was my last attempt as he came closer. I didn't want to do this, but I cannot have you escape, he said as he pushed me to the ground while moving inside with the sound of chains rattling. I laid on the ground, watching as he walked closer to me, clamping the chains over my ankle while ignoring my pleas. He stared at me with satisfaction before he moved away, sheathing his dagger back into his side as he walked to the basement door. What did I do to you, uncle? I asked, watching as he stood over the basement door with my chain clamped over my ankle once again. You will never understand, Astrid, he said with a scowl on his face as he shut the door in my face, leaving me back in the dark. I laid on my back with the smell of the dank basement irritating my nostrils. Is this the life I'm going to live now? I asked myself as I slid into the darkness of tiredness. Not enough to care about my environment. I woke up to my stomach rumbling, having eaten less than a square meal for the time I had spent in this hole. I did not know the concept of time, as light never filtered through this place I was in. Everything seemed to happen at once. "Uncle!" I screamed as I crawled my way up the stairs to the basement door. No answer came, even as I banged at the door. I stared at my legs, wondering what would have happened or if he had come and freed me for the time being. The door gave way, tumbling to the side even without me pushing it open. "Uncle!" I called out again as I tiptoed my way out into the open. A chill wind blew through the house, causing my teeth to clatter while I stood in my tattered clothes. No one seemed to be in the house. Even the fireplace seemed cold for a place that needed lighting. I gulped as I looked around the empty house. The emptiness was the only reminder I needed to escape as I lurched towards the door. It opened at my push. The sun lit the evening sky in orange as it set on the horizon. Fog covered the place, making vision hazy, but I had to move fast. "Astrid!" I heard someone shout from the side of the house. I gulped as I faced the fog in front of me. It was enough to cover my tracks. I only hoped it would give me enough time to meet with others who would help me. I turned, running through the wood with leaves and branches slapping on my face. My heart raced as I ran forward, hoping I would stumble onto someone to save me. It happened as my legs stumbled against a tree root, sending me rolling on the ground. "I told you to stop trying to escape," my uncle said as he caught up to me, kicking me in my stomach. I gasped in pain. Pain of hanging and his foot sticking into me. No words left my lips as I turned against the prodding of his foot, crawling my way towards the light at the end of the darkness when my uncle climbed over me. A cry of pain escaped my lips as he grabbed a handful of my hair, jerking my head backwards with his blade slipping out of his sheath. "I told you I would kill you if you tried to run again," he said as he backhanded me with the butt of his blade. I felt the word swoon as I dropped to the ground. Maybe I should go ahead and do it. It would save the world from a lot. "You wouldn't lay a hand on her." I turned with my hazy vision, staring as a man appeared from the fog. He seemed composed with his dark, slick hair and a fur coat on his shoulders. I had never seen another person or heard my uncle talk with another person, especially someone who seemed to have no fear of where he stood. My uncle chuckled as he moved away from me, swinging his dagger between his fingers. "And who are you to decide what I have to do with her?" The man held up his hand as he walked closer, letting me see his face even clearer. "Just a concerned passerby who heard the cries of a damsel. Run along now, lad. She is no damsel in distress," my uncle said, waving his hand at the man. The man chuckled as he moved even closer. "I know a damsel in distress when I see one, and she is one. How often do you wish death upon yourself?" "As often as it can come." "Then I shall grant your request," my uncle said as he lashed forward. The dagger danced in his hand. I hadn't seen my uncle fight, but he did not look like any ordinary fighter as his hand weaved, stabbing at this stranger. The stranger did not seem disturbed, dodging and bobbing out of my uncle's reach. My eyes closed on themselves with my chest heaving as I tried to catch my breath. Getting kicked in the chest and having the butt of a dagger digging into the side of my temple wasn't what I had expected from someone I called my uncle. I opened my eyes, staring at a man with blood over my uncle and his blank eyes staring at me as he choked on his own blood. "You will not understand." My uncle stuttered with blood puttering from his mouth. "She cannot leave this place." "I don't have to understand why a man would hold a lady captive. Treat her the way you did and try to kill her," the stranger said as he squatted to look at my uncle. "She isn't who you think she is," my uncle said. It seemed all he had for me was hatred, but it seemed to fade in his dying moment. "She cannot leave this place." The stranger turned to me with his dark eyes, seeming to stare into my soul. "I'm afraid I cannot obey your wish, mister, and you can do nothing about it because you are dying." My uncle laughed at those words. "Don't say I never warned you." He stopped still with his hands falling to his side while the stranger stood, wiping his hand on my uncle's body. "It seems you've gone through a lot in his hand. What was he to you?" "A captor?" the stranger asked as he walked towards me. I stepped back. I was ready to trust anyone who would help me escape the shackles my uncle had on me, but being saved by someone only built a distrust in my heart. He was my uncle. I gulped, snapping on a twig and jerking as the snap sent birds fluttering in the air. The stranger nodded, turning towards my uncle's stiff body. "It seems we would have to burn his body, or at least bury him. I would want you to leave his body in disparity." I gulped as I stared at my uncle's body. His eyes remained staring at me like he meant to let me know he was watching me at all times. "Anything you can do to his body would." I felt a sudden darkness overwhelming me with blood sticking from my nose. The ground wound from under me with the sky swirling and my body weightless. A thud as the darkness took over, and all I heard was sound. I woke up with the sound of fire crackling next to me with the stranger eating meat he was roasting over a stick. He wasn't wearing the fur coat I had seen him in, instead it was wrapped around my body. "You don't have to sit up," the stranger said as he chomped over the meat. I said nothing, staring at the meat over the fire. My stomach rumbled as if on cue. The man stared at me with a smile on his face. "You are hungry?" I nodded my head while my throat salivated as the wind blew a whiff of its aroma to my nose. The man slipped out a dagger from his belt, cutting pieces of the meat. He moved closer, handing both meat and dagger in my hand. "Eat slowly. It is extremely hot." I nodded as I stared at my hand. It was the same dagger my uncle always used. It seemed different from the weapons I was used to seeing him use. That man seemed to know a lot more than someone who maltreated women and seemed out of shape. "That man was my uncle," I said, as I chewed on the piece of meat, but my eyes remained on the mysterious man in front of me. There was something off about him, but yet it pulled me towards him like I knew him from somewhere. "Are you going to continue looking at me or you would eat?" the man asked, turning to me with a smile while he walked to my uncle's body, making sure it was burnt to a crisp before returning to me. "Couldn't wait for you to come before I did something. It was the obvious choice." "Thank you," I muttered, with my teeth gnawing on the meat. We sat still while I ate. My eyes roamed around this being I knew nothing of. He did not seem to have a weapon close to him, but it seemed to have defeated my uncle without stress. I closed my eyes for what seemed like less than 30 seconds, opening them to my uncle's body on the ground. Twigs snapped in the distance, with the both of us standing. I moved closer to him, as it was the only option I had. "Alpha Russ. You found her." 2 men stepped into the area. I pulled away from the side of the man who had saved me, staring into the eyes of 2 other men. They seemed different, but alike in a sense. "What's happening?" "We saw the smoke," one man said as they moved closer. The man who had saved me, Russ, sighed, staring at the spot. "Got caught up in a fight while trying to save her." The man said some random things, but it wasn't enough and I had to end him. Burnt his body to respect the dead, as he is her uncle. "At least you found her," the other said. This one had blue eyes and a smile that showed his vampire teeth. I moved away from the men with raised eyebrows. They had mentioned the words alpha, a term I felt I had heard as I stared at them. "Who are you guys?" Ross stepped forward with his imposing aura. "I am Alpha Ross, Alpha of the North Pack." The second man stepped forward with his brown hair slicked back against his head. "My name is Derek, Alpha of the East Pack." The man with the blue eyes smiled with his hands crossed over his chest. "They call me Asta. I am the Alpha of the Western Pack." "Alpha? Like werewolves?" I asked, holding out the blade in front of me like I could fight off the man who had killed the person who kept me captive. Ross sighed. "Yes, as werewolves." I gulped as I stared at him. "That's a lie. Werewolves do not exist." "Even if they exist, what would they have to do with me?" "Because you are my mate," Ross said with a growl, transforming into a majestic black-furred beast with huge fangs dripping by the side of his lips. I fell back, panting at the sight in front of me. "What's happening?" Asta dropped on all fours, transforming into a white wolf. Derek stood still, watching me. He walked up to me, picking me from the ground. "You are our mate," he said as put me on Asta's back before morphing into a brown wolf. I gulped, feeling the pressure mounting on me as I seemed small in the midst of 3 alphas. "Hold on tight." I could hear Asta's voice in my mind, grabbing onto his fur as he lunged forward with the wind in my hair. The others joined while they bounded across the place, stopping in front of a lake that glistened from the sliver of moon hanging in the sky. Derek changed back to his human form with his coat dropping around him. I could understand the reason they had fur coats around as he eased me off Asta's back. "You can have your bath here. I and the boys will be on the other side." I nodded as Asta transformed, smiling at me. Ross had disappeared even before I could look for him, probably because he would be naked without his coat. They walked away, saying stuffs between themselves while I walked to the water. A sniff of my body told me I needed a bath after the days I had spent in that basement because of my uncle. The water was frigid, but I did not care as I went along, removing my tattered clothes and Ross's fur coat from my body, paddling into the waters. I swam along, tucking my legs under me as I thought about what had happened. I never knew werewolves existed except in the books I had read, yet I was in the midst of not 1, but 3 alphas. What more could I have? I sighed at the thought as I washed myself off the grime and dirt. At least my uncle made me clean myself while he kept me prisoner. I stepped out of the water, turning as they played on the other side of the riverbed. Werewolves? My uncle never told me they existed. What are you looking at? I turned to the voice, bumping into Ross' body. Nothing. I stuttered. Ross stared on. A pull I fought against, but couldn't win as I felt his hand reach for me. You are my mate, and I know you can feel it too. What about the others? My voice was barely a whisper as I asked. We are your mates as well, Astrid said behind me. I hadn't known when they had left the water standing next to me. His gruff voice was like an aphrodisiac. My body hunkered in ways I hadn't expected as Ross moved closer. His lips dropped on mine. It felt like 100 rocks rolling down in my mind as I sucked on his lips. Astrid moved closer, placing his lips on my shoulder and kissing my neck. I stood between three of them in the light of the moon hanging in the night. Derek's teeth grazed my skin, causing me to moan. My skin tingled as the wind blew against my open skin with my clothes falling to the ground. I hadn't noticed their nakedness in the darkness until I felt something poking at me. What's happening? I asked, but it seemed all of them were lost in the passion, drawing me with them as Ross pulled me away, laying me on the soft grasses. I let out a loud moan as Astrid and Derek reached for my breasts. My body shivered as I felt the warmth of their mouth as they sucked on my nipples. Ross laid between my legs, causing me to scream in pleasure as I felt his tongue wrap around my clit. Astrid and Derek held me in place as it seemed I could not control the throngs of pleasure I was feeling, thrashing around until I could feel myself about to explode. Ross stood, stroking his dick in his hand. It was huge, and I knew what he would do with it from the old man tales I had heard my uncle speak with some men as Ross laid over me with the other alphas giving him space. Have you done this before? I shook my head at his question, but my body ached for him to begin. We'll go easy on you, Astrid said, from beside me as his hand stroked my nipple. Ross nodded in agreement. My body tensed as I felt something push between my thighs. I closed my eyes to the pain as he pushed in and out until I felt something pop inside me. It turned from pain to pleasure as his length thrust inside me. My legs shook as he pulled away, each one taking their turn with me. My night felt like a world of sexual fantasies coming to life as I took over in Derek's turn, sitting over his manhood with my pussy juice slipping. A thought entered my head as I held Ross, pulling him close to me and taking his manhood into my mouth. I could hear him moan as he grabbed a hold of my head, thrusting into my mouth. Astrid moved behind me, not wanting to be the only one out. A scream tugged at my lips as he pulled my cheeks apart, pushing into Derek and slipping it into the other hole. It felt like glass tearing at my skin for a minute, but pleasure seemed to grow as Derek continued to fire from below. Pleasure took reign after a few minutes as I resumed with Ross. The sound of our bodies hitting each other echoed into the night. We made love until each of us were on the ground, panting for air after we had reached our climax. Nothing of this sort I had experienced as my body ached and throbbed with pleasure. The trio laid around me, covering me while I laid over Ross' bobbing chest. What now? You are ours, and anything an alpha claims, he protects. Ross said as he put his hand over my head, brushing my hair with his fingers. What does that mean? It is our promise to you. We die before anyone would do you harm, and they would die before they can do you harm, Derek said. His gruff voice only made his words mean deeper. In Northpack. I stood, watching as humans and wolf shifters worked together. A smile on their faces as they moved around. It was a whole new world for me, different from the world I had grown up in. It seemed I still had much to learn as I turned to the footsteps walking into my room. Getting used to our world? Ross said as he walked into the room. I nodded, lowering my head as he stopped in front of me. Astrid and Derek joined, sitting on my bed. It isn't always lovely, Astrid said, with his fingers brushing through his hair. Derek scowled at Astrid. You don't have to make her feel there is much danger in our world. Astrid walked away from me with a smile on his face. Stop with the authority binging. I am also an alpha, but hiding the truth from her wouldn't do her any good. I exchanged glances between the trio. What are you guys hiding from me? Ross heaved a deep breath. We are in a battle. I chuckled, finding the words difficult to believe as it seemed 3 alphas with the same mate would have to fight over me. Is it because of me? Astrid chuckled, being the only lively one in their midst. You are the one who united us against the witches from the south. Witches? Yes. Casters of magic, blazing fire that char the sound from the body. Derek answered in a grim tone and his hand across his shoulders. I shook my head as I stared at them. That's not possible. You didn't believe werewolves were real until you saw us. Why do you think witches would be any different? Astrid asked. His question hardly gone by when a bell rang in the distance. "What is it?" I asked as I noticed all three of them were growling. Astrid turned to me. His jovial face was one that reeked of danger. "You said you didn't believe witches were real. Now is your chance to know the truth." I turned to Ross. "That means I'm going to the battle with you guys." "I can help," I said as I reached for my uncle's dagger. "No. You will stay here and watch the battle," Ross said with the other alphas agreeing. I nodded, feeling their aura turn bloody while I watched as they transformed, jumping through the window to meet their challengers. Fire blazed from the distance as they fought against themselves. It was a battle I had never seen before. Wolves and witches dying alike until I noticed something. It seemed the witches were trying to tie Ross down as they secluded him from the rest. I felt my body go into overdrive, watching them corner him and ready to deliver the finishing blow. "No!" I screamed, with my hands stretched out. Lightning shot from the sky, striking every one of them who had gone close to Ross while my body floated in the air until I was standing above Ross. The witches scattered, turning around and floating away with their loud cackles as they made their move. "A witch amongst werewolves, or are you Estrella's daughter?" One witch who remained floating in the air said as she looked at me with a smirk. "Does it care whose daughter I am?" I asked with lightning and thunder rumbling around me. The witch cackled. "The hybrid with immense power. I can't wait to lay my hands on you," she said as she turned around, dissipating into the air like dust. I watched as the rest of the witches disappeared before my body felt weightless, dropping to the ground. What just happened now? I asked myself, staring at my hands. "She is a witch," someone shouted from the crowd. A piercing headache ripped through my head as I watched the wolves growling in front of me. I could hear their cries from my head while Ross staggered to his feet. "No one is going to lay a hand on her," Ross said, with Astrid appearing in his wolf form, growling at the impeding crowd. "She is a witch. Burn her. Burn her. Off with her head or we refuse any of your leadership." I stared at them with the noise in my head growing louder, then white pain and I was falling to the ground. "Astrid." I could hear Ross calling out my name. His touch felt warm, but fading away just as he lifted me from the ground. "What's happening?" I asked myself, as it seemed I was staring at a mini-battle. The man at the door seemed like I knew him as the little girl hiding behind a woman I recognized as my mother called out to him. "Father." I called out to him while holding onto my mother's clothes. "We'll be fine," my father said as he turned, growling with red liquid splattering over him. A body fell next to him before we ran outside. My father held on to the door. I could see him as he fought off hordes of witches. I was a child in my mother's hand as she ran away, slipping through the door. "I'll be back to help you. I need to drop her off at Dane's place," my mother said as she continued, stopping and panting as she got to my uncle. "Estrella," my uncle called as he saw her, holding his arms out to her as my mother stood in front of him. "Dane," mother called out, staring over her back like she expected something to happen. "What is the issue? Why are you covered in blood?" Uncle Dane asked. My mother stared at me with a sad smile on her face. "Nothing serious. Just people who want powers in their hands that they can never control." Uncle Dane growled as he moved closer to my mom. "I told you not to fall in love with a werewolf. You should have killed him the very instant you met him." My mother smiled, rubbing my hand on my head. "You want him dead? This is the only time he is going to die, and I will be by his side. I only want you to do something for me. You don't think I will let you go and do something stupid?" My mother chuckled, staring at me. "That is, if you can, Dane. And we both know that you cannot stop me." Uncle Dane sighed. His aura reeked of defeat as his shoulders dropped. "What will you have me do?" "Take care of her. Don't let the world know about her. It would be better if she remained hidden from the likes of those who would want to use her for selfish reasons," she said to Uncle Dane while casting a magic spell over me. I gulped as I realized something. My uncle knew about my heritage and all he wanted to do was protect me, albeit taking his anger out on me because my existence was the reason his sister had died. It felt like a dream, but suddenly I knew why I could not remember much about that moment as the lights faded away to my mother's smile. "I love you, Astrid," she said as she turned away, lightning flashing in her hand like the mythological Thor. "Where's my mom going?" I asked as I turned to my uncle. He lifted me from the ground, turning away from that place like it never existed. "To help your father. But we are going somewhere no one has to find you." I woke up with a gasp, staring at the men by my side. Ross sat next to me. Astrid sat at the window, ever smiling with his gaze on me. Derek stood with his hand across his shoulder. I stared at them as each stared at me. You are awake, Ross said with a deep sigh. Seems so, I said as I pushed myself from the bed, sitting in an upright position to stare at them, but they remained silent. What's going to happen to me now that you all know I am a witch? Ross stared at Derek. We don't really know if you are a witch or not. Astrid chuckled, making the lie less trustworthy as he swiped his white hair behind him. More like we do not know what to classify you as. I stared at them, surprised at his answer. What do you mean? You may never have known werewolves existed until we came to claim you for our own, but there are things we've never seen. Things like you, Derek said. I stretched out my hands to them, confused as ever despite my dream. This is me. You are a hybrid of a witch and a werewolf, Ross said with his dark eyes seeming to peer into my soul. Werewolves and witches cannot coexist, but yet here we are with one in front of us. Reason we couldn't smell the scents of witches on her when we found her, Astrid said with a smirk as he leaned on the windowsill with his hand on his knee. I gulped as I stared at them. What happens now? Astrid pushed himself from the window, walking with his chest out. We are in a battle, Astrid. A battle between witches and werewolves, and it seems both sides want something from you, dead or alive. Russ took my hand. His dark eyes held no animosity. You are my mate, and I promised on that night. Nothing is going to happen to you. If it should, it would be over my cold corpse. I looked at the other alphas. Astrid was standing next to Derek, with a smile on his face. You heard the man. You are our mate, and if anyone wants you, they have to pry you after they've gone through our cold corpses.
The end. Did you enjoy the story? Kindly leave your review in the comments and subscribe for more interesting stories. Lots of love.